captain called me up to his office a little later in the scene and said, Nelson, what are you doing? And I said, well, the war is over. I think I want to go study philosophy. Now,
So that's how you ended up as a
that's
philosophy
how
professor.
I ended up in philosophy. And I had the GI Bill, which is a wonderful
It's a
thing.
wonderful thing. Yes, it
Yes.
is. Yes, it is.
Now, I know that you're very much interested in veterans issues.
Yes.
And what do you think are some things that we ought to be addressing right now in our time with all the veterans and more and more veterans that we have returning?
Exactly. And I've been giving this a lot of thought because of the healthcare debate.
Yes.
And veterans health care is a really big deal. The Veterans Administration is the largest health care service in the country, and it's government run. They've got one of the best pharmacy systems going.
I see.
It's really good. But they have always had a problem of funding, and it's because it is discretionary funding. In other words, they have to go hat in hand to Congress every time, every year with a new budget.
Every year?
Every year. And what happens is when we have a conflict, we have a big influx of veterans as the funding runs out, and then the next year's budget doesn't kick in, so a lot of people fall between the cracks. So they've just put through a bill in Congress that they call it advance funding. So they're
Yes.
going to let the VA give them an estimate for what they think they're going to need, and they fund it a year in advance to try to close those gaps.
I see.
But the problem still remains. It's discretionary funding. It's not mandatory.
Why shouldn't it be part of the regular budget?
Well, it should be. It should be, and here's why I think. Let's go back a minute and take a look at veterans health care.
Yes.
The very first veterans care program was in 1644 in the Massachusetts colony.
When?
1644.
1644?
Yes,
The first time we did veterans health care benefits?
before we were even a country. And it was for the Pequot Indian War because, you know, we were taking the land away from them.
Yes.
So they said, well, if you get injured, we'll take care of you. And that was the very first time, as a culture, we said, in the new world, we're going to be responsible for taking care of the people we break, who get broken in our interest.
Yes.
Right? So we have a 400-year almost history. Not quite 400, but still a long history of this. So what we need, I think, is mandatory funding, not discretionary funding. And here's how I think we get it. We have to develop a policy of warranty for serviceability in civilian life.
Yes.
We warranty bullets and rockets and mines and planes, things we're going to blow up on purpose.
Yes.
And we do that because we understand we've taken a raw material, we've set it to hammer and flame, and we've turned it into something entirely different meant for a specific purpose. And this is exactly what they do to you in basic training or officer candidate school. They break you down physically, mentally, emotionally, and they rebuild you.
Yes.
They subject you to just enough stress to recondition your adrenal system, because when brain science is showing us when you subject human beings to stress,
Yes.
it triggers the adrenaline insulin cycle. The adrenaline comes up so you can respond to the crisis, then the insulin brings you back down. Both of these are mood altering hormones, and brain science is showing if you're subjected to enough of those over time, it rewires the biochemistry of your brain, it rewires your entire adrenal system, and it physically changes your brain.
Okay.
So because we have physically, mentally, and psychologically changed people and made a specific product meant for a specific purpose, it has to be warranted, because when it breaks down in civilian life, it puts strains on the welfare system, it destroys our tax base on the back end. And we have homeless veterans that in a country like ours, no veteran should be homeless.
Yes.
We now have homeless women veteran with children's living under our bridges. I can't live with this situation, so I have to do something, and the only thing I really know how to do is run my mouth.
No.
So that's why I'm
As
here.
a matter of fact, there's another next step, and that is, along with knowing what's going on, getting involved politically to change what's going on.
Well, that's why I'm here.
And I'm so glad you are here, because the life of veterans and their life after they've had their period of service is something that all of us are to be and should be concerned about.
We say that we are. I'm not sure as a culture we really mean it in our guts. And I think that's reflected in the fact that the VA is still, discretionary funding and not mandatory. The Department of Defense is automatically funded. I mean, any appropriations bill goes right through.
Yes.
All right, so here's how we do it. As we were invading Iraq, some World War II vets who had retired from the service sued Donald Rumsfeld and the Department of Defense on the theory of contract. Because the Veterans Administration in 1986 started means testing. What that means is they look at your income. And even if you're partially disabled, or even if you're not, if your income's too high, they're going to charge you for your health care. Now, if you have a disability of 50% or greater, you get free health care, but they still have copays on the pharmacy. They're small, $2. But nevertheless, they started means testing, and then they took the VA to an HMO form because the thinking in the VA and the DOD was, well, services got really big for the World War II veterans, but they're all old and they're dying off and we won't need them. This was in 97, after the first Gulf War. After Schwarzkopf and Colin Powell both told them, we're going to have to come back here and do this again, they cut back on the VA funding. All right. Well, Rumsfeld said, look, there's no theory of contract here. Yes, you accepted a promise. Yes, you relied on the promise. Yes, you gave valuable consideration for that promise, 20 years of your life. But there's no contract because the agent who made you the promise worked for the Department of Defense. And the Veterans Administration is not connected to Department of Defense. And he's right.
See, now that doesn't make any sense at all, does it?
It does, because that's the way Truman set it up to begin with. And until Bill Clinton's first presidency, the VA didn't even have a cabinet-level slot. And whether you love or hate the Clintons, at least they gave the VA a cabinet-level seat. So at least they have to talk to him every day now.
Yes.
All right, so here's how we warranty our service members. The Department of Defense has a line item budget. And there are certain line items that are not identified specifically. Right? In 2000, it's estimated that $4.4 billion of line items were moved through the Department of Defense. They use a Form 1080. And so the bursar signs, the Army needs $1 million for tanks. Here you go. Here, Army. Here's the form. And that's how they move money from Department of Defense central coffers into the various branches of service. But $1.1 trillion was moved and not accounted for.
Not accounted for?
It's in the black budgets. The black budgets are classified. Not only are they classified as to amount, they're classified as to usage. You can't know because you don't have the need to know. The president doesn't even know what's in the black budgets. But the beauty of this is you don't have to know. Here's what you do. In 2004, the VA knew they were going to have a $3 billion shortfall. But every time they tell Congress they're going to have a shortfall, their funding gets cut. So they didn't tell Congress. Yet, we know in 2000, 4 years previous, they moved $1.1 trillion through the DOD system to somewhere. $3 billion, $1.1 trillion, you do the math. We've got more than enough money. For every dollar we spend training a service member, we need to put $1,000 into an account at the VA that is a lifetime health care account, which is non-means tested, and you do not require disability for. And that covers both the service member, their spouse, and their children.
I wish you would repeat that one.
All right.
Because this is really the heart of your message.
Here's what we need to do. To create this warranty, we have to connect Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration.
Yes.
The way to do that is to move money. All right? So we just write the checks. We don't have to know how much is in these black budgets. We move this money into the Veterans Administration, and these accounts are specifically for these veterans. $1 that we spend training, we move $1,000 into the VA. And this is a lifetime universal health care account for the service member, their spouse, and their children. This covers physical, mental, dental, optical, OBGYN, the whole 9 yards. And here's why we have to do that. One, it's going to ensure our tax base on the opposite end. We have veterans coming back with head wounds and brain injuries they could not have survived in any other war, but field combat medicine is so good anymore, they're surviving.
Yes.
But they have to be cared for. We have amputees coming back. We haven't had in numbers since World War I. We have post-traumatic stress disorder like we haven't had even in Vietnam.